I'm really excited about the series that we're starting today. There are two kinds of people in this world. There's the kind of person that can go on a month-long trip with nothing more than a backpack. And then there is the kind of person who needs 5 of the largest suitcases known to man for an overnight trip to Memphis. Two different kinds of people. No matter if you are a chronic overpacker like me, or if you're an essentials-only packer, whenever you're packing, you at least think that the things that you are putting in your bag are going to be useful. I've also found that you need different kinds of bags for different trips that you're going to take. If I'm going to pack a bag to go to work, that's going to look different than a bag that I'm going to pack if I'm going to go on a long vacation or an overnight trip or a trip to the beach. When you get that bag out, it still has all the sand in it from the last time that you took a trip to the beach. Or a trip to the mountains, you need different kinds of bags. This series is called Pack Your Bags, and we're going to look at the different kinds of bags that you need to have success when you are in seasons of transition in life. And we're going to talk about some specific things that you need to put in those bags. Transitions are coming. Transitions are coming. In case this is news to you, you are going to go through transitions and seasonal changes in life. In fact, many, if not most of us in the room this morning are in some kind of transition in life right now. August seems to be a time of change, and that means that the beginning of September is a time of getting used to the new normal. The kids go back to school, and you got to get used to the new normal. Miss Amy, some of the kids move off to college, and you got to get used to the new normal. You start a new job, and you got to get used to the new normal. It can be exciting and it can be daunting, but we all have to learn what the new normal will be. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to talk about transition times in life, and I want to talk about what we should pack in our bags to have success through the transition. We don't always know when change is coming. We don't always know when life is going to take us for a ride, but we do know that change is coming whether we're ready for it or not. So why don't we just go ahead and be as ready as we can be for the transitions of life? Let's pack our bags, the right bags with the right things, so we can have success moving from one season into the next. There have been so many times in my life where I've just been bopping along, I'm doing my own thing, I'm minding my own business, and then bam, out of nowhere, one event, one moment happens that throws me into a new season. A moment that throws me into change. Whenever I married Danica, everything changed after that. Whenever my boys were born, everything changed after that. Both of those were in good ways. Good ways, babe. Whenever I lost my grandmother and I felt that pain and that hurt for the first time I actually understood what that kind of loss was, everything changed from that moment on. The day that I knew that I was coming to Wellspring Church to pastor this community was a changing point. Everything from that point forward was going to be different, both good things and bad. But they've all been moments that started the process of turning my life into a new season. And for the most part, this all came from breakdowns in my plans. Change comes when our plans break down. If you want the least amount of disruption as possible, then you have to be prepared with the right tools to fix what is broken when your plans break down. We all have change happening in our lives all the time. If we went around the room this morning, everyone in the room could tell me a funny story about the time that you planned something and it got changed. If we went around the room this morning, everybody could also tell me a not so funny story about you going in a direction and all of a sudden everything changed. We could go around the room this morning and talk about moments in our lives that changed our lives forever. We could talk about breakthrough moments that led us into seasons of blessing, and we could talk about devastating moments that led us into seasons that, if we're all being honest, we wish that we could have skipped over. Moments that lead us into new seasons. It happens in our personal lives, in our families, our jobs, our churches, and our personal walk with Jesus. Change is a constant thing in life. For the next several weeks, I want to give you some practical messages about what to put in your bags and what kind of bags you need to have success through the changes of life that come. And the first bag that we're going to talk about today is the emergency bag. I like this bag. I went and bought it from Walmart if you're looking for an emergency kit. I like it because they put genuine emergency preparedness, as if there was a lot of fake emergency bags floating around out there. They wanted to make sure that you knew this one was the real deal. This is a genuine emergency preparedness bag. Today we're going to talk about the emergency bag. And the emergency bag is not the biggest bag that we will have. It's definitely not the most popular bag that we will talk about, not the most exciting bag that we'll talk about over the next few weeks, but it is the very first one that we will need as we're transitioning from one season into the next. When change happens, we feel like we lose control. We feel like our lives are thrown into chaos. It seems like everything is burning down around us. You feel like you're in an emergency situation and you just have to stop the bleeding before you can move on. Before you can begin, though, to tend to the emergency that is at hand, you have to see it for what it is. You have to accept the reality of what has happened before you can move on. You have to accept the reality of what has happened before you can move into the next season. The first thing that you're going to need this morning, the first thing that you're going to need to have success when you are transitioning is you have to accept reality. We're going to spend the next several weeks in Joshua 1 because if there was ever a people, if there was ever a man who was thrown into transition, it was Joshua. And we learn a lot from this story in Joshua 1. We're going to be in verses 1 through 11. Joshua 1, verses 1 through 11. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, verse number 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them to the Israelites. Verse 3, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Verse 6, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Verse 9, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. Joshua 1, 1 through 11. I love those 11 verses. I love this text. It has all the great elements of a remarkable story. It has a rich history. It's the passing of the leadership torch from one generation to the next. There's a look forward with expectancy to see what God is going to do in the next season. There are doubt and fear there to make things interesting. It's a great story. And within these 11 verses, I believe that we find 5 things that we need to transition from one season into the next. But before we can do that, I think that you have to understand the context of what has actually happened in these 11 verses and what's happened right before these 11 verses start. We're going to be in this series for 5 weeks, but if you don't understand this part, I'm afraid that you're going to miss what God is actually trying to say through the text. Israel's leader, Moses, has just died. If there were a Mount Rushmore of biblical personalities, there is no way that Moses does not make the list. Just before Joshua 1, if you look back to Deuteronomy 34, 10 through 12, it says, "Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses." Moses was the man. No prophet has risen like Moses, who knew God face to face, who did all the signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and in the whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all of Israel. Moses was an amazing leader. Now, imagine that you get to follow that guy. Imagine that you get to follow Moses as the leader of God's people. Talk about a new season for Joshua. Talk about a new season and transitioning for God's people. You have to follow, as the leader of God's people, someone who knew God face to face, who had face-to-face conversations with God Almighty. You get to follow him as the leader of God's people. And not only do you have to follow Moses as the leader of God's people, but you have to take God's people to a place that Moses never could take them. The expectations for your leadership are even greater than they were for the prophet of God, the man that knew God face to face. Have you ever felt like the expectations of the new season were going to crush you? Have you ever felt like the expectations were just too overwhelming? You were overwhelmed by what you knew was coming next. Maybe that was not the slip up of God. Maybe that was the strategy of God. Maybe those expectations that you knew were coming to crush you was not a mistake that God made, but it was God's plan all along. What if God knew that you had grown to the point in the season that you were, in the old season? What if he knew that you had grown to a point where you could handle that season on your own, so he needed to move you into another season that frankly was way too big for you, to remind you who was actually in control to begin with, whose power you were walking in to begin with? Maybe those expectations have a purpose. The next season may be too big for you. In fact, the next season will probably be too big for you. But God was there to walk with Joshua through the next season. God told Joshua, just like I was with Moses, just like I was with your leader, I promise that I will be with you. I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. And just like God did not leave Joshua, he will not leave you. God is not in the business of leaving his people, making a transition to a new season. Our plans may be changing. We may be stepping into an unknown season, but the plan of God has not changed. He knew exactly where you were going to be at this very moment in time. And God begins telling Joshua in verses 1 and 2 the first thing that Joshua is going to have to do if he's going to have success in this new season. Let's go back and look at it. We're going to get to our emergency bag. Verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide. Here it comes in verse 2. Moses, my servant, is dead. Moses is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. God says, hey Joshua, Moses is dead. The man who you followed was dead. The man who led all of these people, he is dead. And you got to come to terms with that before you can move into the next season. Before you can go and do what I have called you to do, you have to accept the reality of where you are. And the reality is that Moses is dead. Don't you think that Joshua knew that? Really? Don't you think that Joshua knew that Moses was dead? Joshua was his right-hand man. If Joshua was not there when Moses died, he would have been among the first people to know when Moses died. But still, when God begins to call Joshua to lead his people into a new season, the first thing that he says is, Joshua, Moses is dead. Why? Because God needed Joshua to do more than just know that Moses was dead. He needed Joshua to accept the reality that Moses was dead. The head knowledge that Moses was dead wasn't enough. He needed Joshua to know the old season is gone. As good as Moses was, as an amazing leader as he was, that season is over. Moses is dead. You got to accept that so we can move into the next season that I have for you. There's a difference between understanding something and accepting something. The emergency bag is not understand your reality. We all understand our reality. We know the circumstances that we're in. I don't need you to understand your reality. I need you to accept your reality. It applies to every person in the room today. The first step to navigating through a successful new season is accepting your reality. You can love where you are, or you can hate where you are. You can understand it. You don't have to understand it. You can want it to come, or you cannot want it to come. It doesn't matter how you feel about the reality. You have to accept the reality before you can move on. And far too many people stop during the transition to a new season. Change makes them afraid, so they decide to lay down in a dead season instead of walking into an unknown season. What's so crazy about that is that if you're following Jesus, you're being led by the Holy Spirit, then the next season has purpose in your life. Maybe the next season is a blessed season. Maybe the next season is a season of testing, but if that is the season that the Holy Spirit is leading you to, then that's the place that you need to be. You want to talk about living your best life? You cannot live your best life in a season that God has vacated. I'm going to say it again until everybody gets with me. Everybody wants to live their best life. Hashtag best life. Instagram life. Facebook life. Everything's great. If you want to live your best life, you can't live it in a season that God has already moved on from. Sometimes we lie down in a dead season that was no fun when God was there. It's definitely not going to be fun now that God has moved on from that season. We lay down in the darkest seasons of life and we wonder why nothing ever gets better. We let the worst moments of our life define who we're going to be. And we wonder why we can't find our joy. And we wonder why we can't find our happiness. It's because we stopped moving in a dead season. And the longer we're there, the more afraid we are to take a step. The longer we lay in that dead season, the more afraid we are to move on. But just as dangerous as lying down in a bad season that is dead is lying down in a great season that is just as dead. Oh, you got to get that this morning. Just as dangerous as stopping in a miserable season that God is no longer in is stopping in a fantastic season that God is also no longer in. Some of the greatest limits to future successes come from past successes. We want to hold on to them. We want to recreate them. That's when life was good. So if I can just get back to that season, if I can just get back to that spot, then maybe I can experience what I experienced there again. This is why so many churches don't grow. They will not move on from a season that was at one time good, but is now dead. I'm going to need somebody to help me preach this next part. They want the church to look like it did 30 years ago. But get this. The younger generation has done that generation a disservice if we look at them and say, well, you want it to look like it looked then because you're selfish. That's not true. You want it to look like it looked then because you're stuck in your ways. That's not true. They want it to look like it did 30 years ago because 30 years ago is the last time that they experienced the real power and presence of God in their life. And they think in their mind, if I can just get back to that moment, if we can sing those songs, and if the pastor can look this way, and if we can come together and do these things, then maybe I can recreate this season again and experience the presence of God. Their problem is not that they're selfish or that they're stuck in their ways. Their problem is that they're trying to recreate a season that was once good but is now dead. We can't live in a good season that God has moved on from and expect the things that God gave us in that season when He was there. We limit ourselves relationally and in our careers and in our personal walks with God by trying to recreate successful seasons that are now dead. God has to make sure that Joshua doesn't lie down in a dead season. So He says, Joshua, I'm going to do a new thing. Joshua, Moses is dead. The old thing is dead. I'm going to do a new thing. We all get excited about a new thing, don't we? We can shout over a new thing. We're all excited about a new thing. Yes, God, send me a new thing, Lord. Send me a new season. Send me a fresh anointing, God. Send me some more blessing. We're excited about a new thing until we realize that before we can step into a new thing, the old thing has to die. We have to come to the understanding Moses is dead before we can step into the very best that God has for us. As great of a leader as Moses was, and he was a great man, as great of a prophet as Moses was, the very best days for the Israelites were ahead. The most prosperous days for the Israelites were ahead. The promised land for the Israelites were ahead. But they never would have gotten there if they had lied down in a dead season. If they never accepted their reality, the reality that it was not in God's plan to take the Israelites into the promised land with Moses as their leader, they never would have gotten to the next level. And we can get so caught up in our plans that we totally miss what God is trying to do in our lives. We get so consumed with wanting God to move our way, in our time, in the way that we had planned, that we completely miss that God is trying to move us into a different season. You had a plan. You had it all mapped out. You had charts and diagrams and expense reports, and boom, just like that, you're in a new season. Everything has changed. Your diagrams don't work anymore. Everything just got a whole lot harder to navigate. And if you stop there, you'll never make it to the best season that God has for you. You'll never make it into the season that God intended you to live in. As a community of believers, we have to notice and accept our realities and move forward together when God is moving us from one season into the next. We have to turn together. We have to go through the transitions of life together. Husband and wife, you have to go through the transitions of life together. You have to make sure that you are turning together. Why do you think it is that empty nesters all of a sudden start having marital problems after 30 years and 3 kids? It's because they made a lot of turns over those 30 years, but they didn't make the turns together. He hits his midlife crisis. She hits whatever it is that women hit. Danica told me to be careful with that one. They took the kids to every band concert, every youth event, every ballet class, every baseball game, every football game. They watched the kids grow up in front of their own eyes. They watched their kids change in front of their own eyes. But they forgot that it wasn't just the kids who were changing, that they were also changing, but they weren't changing together. And by the time the kids are gone, and they look up and it's just the two of them staring at each other for the rest of their lives, they realize that they didn't make the turns together. They didn't accept the new realities of where they were. Why do you think that otherwise smart people find themselves in financial ruin? It's because they didn't accept the reality and make the change that needed to be made. They had the knowledge. They had the knowledge. They knew there wasn't any money in the bank. They had the knowledge. They just didn't accept the reality of what was happening. And it's not always fun to accept reality. It's not always fun to accept your reality. Sometimes your reality is, hey, I'm broke and I should probably stop living like I'm not broke. It's not always a fun thing to accept your reality and to act on it. But your reality is your reality whether you accept it or not. It's there, whether you want it to be there or not. It's real, whether you want it to be real or not. And so you have to accept your reality before you can move on to the next thing. The first step to navigating a new season is accepting the reality that the old season is dead, that Moses is dead. In the spirit of full disclosure this morning, I understand that this is a lot easier said than lived out. I understand that I can stand up here and say that you should not let things that happened 5 days ago or 5 years ago still have that kind of control on your life. If you can accept that reality, then you can move on. I understand that that is easy for me to stand and say. You didn't want the reality that you were in, but it is your reality nonetheless. It's your reality nonetheless. Accepting that reality can be very difficult. So I want to give you 4 things very quickly this morning. I want to give you 4 things that I want you to put in your emergency bag. I want you to put these 4 things in your bag that will help you accept reality. And there are 4 promises from God's Word about who God is in our life. And I think that they're so valuable to us when we're going through seasons of unknown, when we're going through seasons of transition and change. Number one is this: God's grace is sufficient. God's grace is sufficient. 2 Corinthians 12:9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Accepting your reality may not always be easy. And you're going to have to tell yourself that you accept it today, and then you're going to have to wake up tomorrow, and you're going to have to accept it again. And you're going to have to wake up the next day, and you're going to have to accept it again. But guess what? The mercies of God are going to be new for you every single day that you wake up. His grace is always new for us. His grace is sufficient. Number two, God's peace is perfect. His grace is sufficient, and His peace is perfect. Isaiah 26:3, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast. Why? Because they trust in you. Because they trust in you. What this all really boils down to is, do you have trust in the sovereignty and in the goodness of God? Do you trust that God knows all things? And do you also trust that that God who knows all things and who has a sovereign plan is good and that He is for you? His peace is perfect. Number three, God's strength is amazing. When you're coming out of a great season, or when you're coming out of a season that hasn't been so great, when you're going into a season of blessing, or when you're going into a season that you would rather pass over, God's strength is amazing. Isaiah 40:29, He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. His strength is amazing. Again, be reminded, as you're trying to accept your new reality, be reminded that you're not doing this on your own power. That you're not doing this on your own strength. On your own strength, it would crush you. There's a reason that you feel like this next season is too big for you. It's because the next season is too big for you. God didn't call you into the next season alone, though. He's leading you into the next season. And where He leads you, He will always provide strength that will sustain you. His strength is amazing. Number four, God's presence is comforting. His grace is sufficient. His peace is perfect. His strength is over the top amazing. And His presence is comforting. Exodus 33:14. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you. My presence will go with you. And I will give you rest. My presence will go with you. And I will give you rest. There are people here this morning who are living in a constant state of unrest. And God's here saying, my presence will be with you, and I will give you rest. Maybe you're sleeping at night. Maybe you're not sleeping at night. I don't know. But your soul isn't getting any rest. You're in a dark place. It's not necessarily a bad place, but it's a place that you don't know what the next step looks like. You're in a place where your plans are no good anymore. It's a scary place. And there are some people who are letting that consume them to the point that their soul never gets any rest, that their soul never gets any peace. And God is saying, hey, when you clothe yourself in my presence, it doesn't matter what's going on around you. It doesn't matter the circumstances that surround you. When my presence clothes you, I will give your soul rest. His presence is comforting. We will all face seasons of transition in life. There's nothing that we can do to stop it. But we have to be able to not only recognize that the transition is there, but accept the realities of the transition, accept the realities of the new season if we're going to have success in the new season. We have to fill our bags with things that will help us through the transitions of life. And the first thing that we have to do, the first bag that we have to grab, is the bag that helps us accept the reality of where we are. We're going to accept reality today. If you'll do that with me, I want you to stand this morning.